Alright then, time for another member submitted deck, this time from Forgotmytea, and it is Desecration time with Khagra's Ravagers here, paired with Tooth and Claw. Just some quick notes on Khagra's. They are a 4-man aggro warband of Slaves to Darkness, consisting of 3 Chaos Warriors and a Chaos Sorcerer. Leading them is Khagra, the Usurper, while her sister Sacha Bittertongue is the Spell Slinger. They are all 4 wounds, except the Sorceress. Their thing is to mess with the objectives, namely desecrating them, making them unable to be held until an enemy fighter gets on them and stays on them until the end of a power step. There's some additional nuance there, but let's not get too technical. They inspire when there are 2 desecration tokens on the battlefield. There's card tech to make it happen, which we will go over in due time, but the fighters can also do it as well in 2 different ways. They can all do the sacrifice reaction after they kill someone, thus desecrating the objective they were standing on while attacking, or the objective the target was in when they were taken out of action. In addition, the 2 hangarounds, Rasek and Kragan, can despoil at the end of the action phase, thus desecrating an objective token they are standing on. They all hit pretty hard, and Khagra and Rasek both inspire to 2 shields, so they can take a hit or 2 as well, as any self-respecting Chaos Warrior should. Let's take a look at the deck. Searches first. From the faction deck, we find Brutal Desecration, which is given for desecrating an objective. Very simple. Then we have Desolate Domain for all objectives on 1 or more players' territories being desecrated. Even if we have 2 objectives on our side, we can basically desecrate one and flip the other one, and it's scored. So yeah, an obvious inclusion there as well. Do note that it's all objective tokens on 1 or more players' territories. You can't do it with desecrating an objective in no man's land. Yeah. Malevolent Exploits is also pretty solid passive glory for playing 3 power cards in the same power phase. It's just bound to happen sooner or later, and both upgrades, employs, and spells counts towards this. Very solid. Then we find Power of Chaos, which is way more of a stretch with killing someone with a spell, but I'll still have to consult our options here to see if I still think it makes the cut. Macabre Spectacle is next with killing someone with a Savage Fighter. Not the toughest job in the world, I guess, but I generally want to avoid kill searches as much as I can. Toyed With is last with having a vulnerable enemy fighter after a friendly fight's attack action. It's pretty solid, I've found, since the vulnerable fighter does not need to be the one we just hit. Obviously a bit of a rough draw in round 1 versus stuff like Morgox or Drom or the like, but still not bad, generally speaking. Of these ones, I find Macabre Spectacle and Power of Chaos the least favorable. We only have 1 wizard, and she is very killable. Plus, she kinda kills herself as well with suffering backlash every time she fails to cast her spell attack action. I very much prefer Embraced Savagery, since it's just very easy to score with a smaller warband such as this. Charge with everyone, and it's scored, especially easy in round 2 or 3 when you're bound to be down a fighter or 2, or 3 even. Macabre Spectacle can probably stay, just simply because there's nothing really easier to put in end phases than. On the Dark Road is 1 glory for each friendly fighter having an upgrade, or 1 fighter having 3 upgrades. I'm not too happy with this as a first round objective. We don't really want to end up with 3 or 4 upgrades on our starting hand, and even if we do, we might struggle to equip them all. Obviously pretty easy later on, but I prefer my 1 glory end phases to be pretty much out to scores in all rounds. Ravagers all is having all fights inspired, unless we play something that forces us to uninspire, like some nasty parasitic goo or the like. This is pretty much the type of auto-score I'd like to see. We all inspire at the same time, and with just desecrating 2, we should be able to pull this off pretty fast. Raised Realm is 1 glory for 2 desecration tokens on the board. Also pretty easy in my experience, but it should be for 1 glory. Ferocious Rampage is 2 glory for all friendly fighters being inspired and or savage, and no fighters, friend or foe, holding objectives. Pretty much all teams have something with holding objectives or feature tokens, which is oftentimes the same thing, so we might struggle to score this without basically wiping our opponents. The type of card that sometimes just luckily happens and sometimes isn't scored at all, but it is 2 glory, and we are a bit starved for glory, so this might be the wishy-washy maybe card that we might need to take in this format. Focal point I do like. We need a leader alive, not necessarily Khagra, which I will return to, and that leader needs to have a friendly fighter within 2 and a foe within 2 as well. In my experience, pretty easy to set up and score reliably. Move or die is just move everyone and should always be scored. So the ones I am dubious about are On the Dark Road and Ferocious Rampage here. I am going to give Ferocious Rampage the benefit of the doubt, but ditch On the Dark Road for Glorious Slaughter, as killing 3 fighters should certainly be accomplished by the time the second end phase rolls around. If not, we are probably in a bad spot anyway. And with On the Dark Road being basically a second end phase card anyway for 1 glory, I prefer ramping it up with 2 glory there and also ramping up our total glory to 15, as I think 14 might be a bit low. Let's check out the gambits. First up we have Eternal Vendetta for a reroll. Not terribly exciting, but aggro is our game plan, so why not? Eye of the Gods only works if an enemy leader is out of action, and then if that's the case, our leader is given either +1 dice cleaver and snare until that leader dies. We obviously always take +1 dice. Very solid buff, but the enemy leader is usually the last to die, so I'm not crazy about this. Flames of Spite I do love. It's surprise +1 damage after the determined success step in an attack in which you rolled at least a crit. So many cards promises +1 damage to upcoming attacks that may well whiff, so this is just awesome. And the damage is included in the attack, so it's not ping damage after the fact. So it does work to ramp up the damage for a kill search, which is important. And the warband mechanic as well, which needs our attack actions to kill enemy fighters. Power Reclaimed is a fun card, which makes the rivaling sister Sarcha the leader if Khagra dies, which is an awesome life insurance for Focal Point as a side note, but also makes the game plan of charging Khagra headlong into enemy territory for a potential 3 damage attack upfront, Ripper style, I guess, a viable option. And yeah, it buffs Sarcha with +1 wizard level and takes her up to 4 wounds as well. Worst case scenario, if Sarcha is dead, just salvage the card. Ravaging Advance does nothing if all your fighters are in enemy territory, but it is very solid in your early activations, with pushing everyone 1 step closer into the fray. Ritual Desecration is free desecration and free inspire for the fighter standing on the objective token you are desecrating with this card. So yeah, very solid. Spurred On is an out of sequence move for a friendly fighter after the leader moves. This is especially solid with the backup leader card there. Worst case scenario, just salvage it. Rack the Lands is another free desecration, but this time for an empty objective next to a friendly fighter. Deploy next to an objective and start desecrating. Activation 1, very solid. Then there are 2 spells here. Mask of Darkness is first with moving a friendly fighter within 3 to an objective token over yonder. That includes the caster, by the way. Solid way to put Razek or Kragan on an objective to despoil before end phases, for example. Or move any fighter to set up an attack without charging. Whisper of Chaos is also very solid with a push and a ping. A very strong spell indeed. The ones I am a bit dubious about here, Eternal Vendetta and Eye of the Gods. I really want to find a place for Dark Command, which is very reliable ping damage. Yes, we do want to predominantly kill with attack actions, but this can get enemies into kill range for those attack actions. And if we are in a position that we're already inspired and scored most of our kill searches, it's just very solid ping damage to just kill stuff off and get the glory. Or make people vulnerable to set up the Toyed With search as well. I also think Call to Heal is a very solid push card. This can push both friend or foe if they are savage, and obviously has amazing utility because of that. I am going to ditch Eternal Vendetta and Eyes of the Gods for these 2 cards. Upgrades then. Blasphemous Cuirass is first with a damage reduction on the roll of a shield by 1, down to a minimum of 1. Especially good on Khagra and Razek when inspired, so don't waste it on the 1 shield dudes or dudettes. Bolstered by Hate is +1 wound, solid, but will make anyone except non-power reclaimed Sarcha large. Still worth it, I guess. Desecrator's Gauntlets is a solid way to make ferocious rampage a bit easier with shoving enemies off objectives, plus other uses obviously, but that's certainly one of them. Grudging defense is simply guard. Sure, it's okay, but I do prefer guard on dodge fighters, especially 2 dodge fighters, as it's just a more nominal buff there than it is here. It's just 1 extra result as a success. Sure, there's drive back immunity as well, but I think the effect is too weak to render an inclusion. It is good to help stick Razak and Kragan to objectives before the end phase, sure, but I still think it's not really strong enough. Ruinous Might is +1 damage to range 1 and 2, very strong and a bit more rare nowadays to have plain +1 damage, so yeah, obvious inclusion. Feral Alteration I'm not really a fan of. It's pretty much only usable on Sacha, and if she has her power reclaimed, it disappears, so I'm probably skipping this one. Feral Instincts is good for this crew. It restricts us a bit, but with so much range 1, it mostly restricts us to the stuff we want to do anyway, mainly charging and killing stuff. And +1 damage is a good payoff for those restrictions. And being a beast doesn't really matter, we don't want to hold objectives anyway. Gifted Ferocity is +1 dice. Amazing, obviously. Hellfire Sword is a very solid ranged option for 3 range, 2 hammers, 2 damage, but only for Khagra or Razak. Still too good to pass up on. And, I mean, we can always salvage it if push comes to shove. Unearthly Charisma is +1 dice to other fighters' range 1 attack actions if they are within 2 of this fighter. It's restricted to a leader, but doubling down on leaders with that ploy makes this pretty solid, really. And being within 2 isn't that much of a stretch, I guess, even if we only get the +1 dice to trigger like 1 or 2 times during the course of a game. I would say it's probably worth it. Accuracy is king and we need to kill stuff for the Dark Gods and all that. So I'm going to ditch 2 cards here. First up is Feral Alteration. Sure, it's a good buff for Sacha in a pinch, as I said, but it's a bit of a too niche card to take just for that, given the stuff we can take instead, and I'm going to swap in Beast Caller there for a reactionary push, which is pretty solid and easy to trigger. Drive back a Savage Fighter, trigger this one. Be driven back yourself or pushed by a card, or push an enemy fighter that's savage, and this one triggers. Hop on to an objective with this reaction to set up Desecration later. Yeah, endless applications really. Secondly, I'm going to ditch Grudging Defense and swap in Mark of the Stampede. We are mostly range 1 and our move isn't amazing with 3 uninspired and 4 inspired, especially if we are meeting a staggered board setup or a long board or something. I don't think the movement buff can hurt really. Conqueror's Cloak can also accomplish this, but that only works on charges, while this works on every move, reactionary and otherwise. So yeah, that is it. Not too far off from the original deck, I guess, but I couldn't help myself from doing a bit of tweaking there, of course. While we take a look at the tweaked deck here, I'll just mention that if you want to have your deck reviewed in a similar fashion, do consider to become a member, get access to this feature, as well as the member Discord, greater influence on the content, early access, and the chance to help a devoted content creator out, of course. This is it for me tonight. I will let the end credits roll now. Cheerios. This is me again, chiming in to thank you for watching the video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment. All of those things help me out immensely. If you feel so inclined, do consider to become a member to gain a greater influence over the content, early access, and just generally help me out. If you like this particular video especially much, feel free to click the thanks button as well to leave a small donation. All of those things are 100% optional, and I will never keep videos permanently locked behind a paywall, as my main goal is to spread the love for these games as much as possible. A special thanks to my members, whose legendary names are scrolling right before your eyes at this very instant. Don't forget, the games are not only about winning, but also creating unforgettable memories with your friends and opponents. That's it for me. See you soon. Bye bye.